This conference will now be recorded.
So just to give a recap of what we were doing, just to make sure that we all are on the same page, this is what I have. I have virtual machines that are running, let's say IIS in the background. So I have two different virtual machines out here, same configuration, same region, and indeed same virtual network. So two different virtual machines running as a part of the same availability set. So I have something like the availability set out here. So they are running as a part of the same availability set out here. And in order to make sure that we maintain the traffic, in order to make sure that we balance the traffic between these two, we are using a standard Azure load balancer. And when and when we were creating the load balancer, there are a couple of components of the load balancer that we started configuring. Like firstly, the SKU of the load balancer, we tried basic, but for some reason the basic wasn't really working out here. So we went to standard. And then the type of the load balancer, we used a public load balancer out here. And we used a regional load balancer. I'll say public and regional. And then in the second page, we configured something called as a front end IP address of the load balancer. And after that, we talked about something called as a load balancing rules. We said how the traffic needs to be diverted from the front end to the back end. And before that, sorry, we also used something called as a backend pool, wherein we said what is the name of the pool and what are all the machines that are running as a part of the pool, what is the virtual network the machine belongs to, and so on and so forth. And then we declared the load balancing rule, and inside the load balancing rule we configured something called as a health probe. So we did this, and then we went ahead deployed the load balancer. So the load balancer now understands that okay fine, there are two machines in the background, and the load balancer is now following an algorithm called round robin, which means that the requests that the load balancer is receiving from the end client, there can be multiple machines out here that are hitting the same public IP address. The load balancer is trying to divert the traffic and distribute them equally amongst the available pool of the machines. And you have the health probe between all these things, which for every 5 seconds is going ahead checking the backend pool, understanding what is the health of the machines, and reporting it back to the load balancer. Load balancer is saying, yes, okay, fine, the machines are alive, the machines are healthy. So let me go ahead and divert the traffic to these machines accordingly. So this is how the load balancer is now working. And this is the mechanism that we were looking at yesterday. So any questions that I can take till here on any questions that are unanswered or any queries that are here till how we configured it. And we also did a we also did a demo. We said if I hit the load balancer for the very first thing, I got demo VM1. If I shut down the demo VM1, I get something like demo VM2 out here as such. So yes, anyone, any questions till here?
So basic load balancer, I mean, did you had a chance to look at it? Why it didn't work?
Yes. So basic load balancer, what's really happening out here is that see when I created a virtual machine, the public IP attached to that particular the public IPs that were attached to that particular machines were a standard public IPs, and it was a static public IP out here. Both the machines had the same configuration. Now, even though I removed these particular standard IPs later and I tried to attach the load balancer, it was still not taking it because the earlier configuration of these machines were pointing to a standard IP out here. You cannot attach a basic load balancer to machines that were using a standard IP addresses out here. We cannot really do that. That's the reason it wasn't really identifying that okay fine, the machines in the backend pool are, let's say, something like the machines basically. I mean, it's not able to show the machines out here. So even if I go here right now, so it is for some reason caching this out. So if I just go ahead and create a load balancer right now and say demo load balancer, I'll say basic LB. And if I go for a basic SKU, I'll just give a simple IP configuration here telling test and test. Not creating this out, but if I want to create this, if I, sorry, then add that out. So let's say test basic. And if I say this is test basic, if I go into the backend pool and try adding the machines out here, I'll say this is demo vnet out here. If I try adding the machines, they are, I'm able to see them for a second and then they vanish out. Reason, reason being they were earlier taking, let's say, a standard IP configuration out here. So now if I say show resources that are not available, which is demo VM1 and 00, it's telling the SKU of the resources IP address is different from the SKU of the load balancer. So for some for some reason, it's just caching this out. So best practice when I was going through, let's say, the documentation yesterday, is that when you create a virtual machine, either attach, let's say, a basic public IP to it, or don't even attach a public IP to it. In that case, you'll be able to attach these machines either to a standard or a basic load balancer out here as such.
Um, so when you say standard, I mean, are you talking about the static IP addresses, Kiran?
No, so the type of address you can do a static or a dynamic. So for
Hmm.
example, if you go for public IP addresses out here,
Yeah, there are only two options: dynamic and static.
dynamic and static. But
Yeah,
again, you have a basic, the SKU of the IP can be basic and standard.
basic and
So if you
standard.
go
Okay,
for a basic IP, you can attach these IPs to a basic load balancer.
okay,
If you
okay.
go for a standard, you cannot attach these standard to a, let's say, basic load balancer out here. That was the issue that was happening yesterday.
Okay. But what is difference? I mean, basic and standard IP addresses.
See, when you hit standard, right, you'll have
Hmm.
something like zone redundancy coming into picture.
Okay.
And these are used for, let's say, production based workloads. And when you go for standard again, you don't have an option to change it from dynamic to static or static dynamic. Standard comes in one default section called static. So standards are always static out here. Come with zone redundancy, so better reliability, better SLA. Whereas for testing, you can be using something like basic, and then you have, let's say, something like static and dynamic, and you don't get a zone redundancy at all. There's no zone redundancy, so it doesn't really offer you a great SLA out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any questions with the configuration of the load balancer till here? So let me go ahead, and I have all my machines shut down right now. So I'll just go ahead. I'll say demo VM1 and 0 and demo VM1. I'll start these out. It will take like about a minute or so to start this out. And once the machines get started, right now they're in a stop state. Once the machines are started right now, it will take about a minute and we'll try to test our load balancer. And one thing that I want you all to observe, guys, is this. See, yesterday you all remember that both the machines, right? They had different set of public IPs. Machine 1 had a different public IP, machine 2 had a different public IP out here. Let's check this out today. I'll duplicate this tab and let me go into machine 1 as well. I'll say it's demo VM1. So the public IP that is attached to this machine is what? 2062.51.6. This is what again? Same public IP. If I click on this public IP, this is whose IP this is? It's the IP which is attached to what? The load balancer. So if I click on this, so whatever IP that I configured for the load balancer, what the load balancer is now telling is that the rule of the load balancer is this. Whenever you attach a machine here in the background, what the load balancer does is to accommodate the machine into the pool, it goes ahead into the background and updates the NIC card of that particular machine. It says, okay, fine, you know what? It'll go there. It'll say, okay, fine, your NIC card is there. I'll go ahead, take your NIC card, whatever IP is there out, I'll take that IP, and whatever is the IP that is attached to the load balancer, it'll update the NIC card with that particular IP out here as such. Which means all the machines that are running in the backend pool of these particular, let's say, load balancer out there will have the same IP as the load balancer has. That's how the load balancer will be able to establish a parent-child relationship. It says, okay, fine, I'm the parent, and I'll identify all the child machines using my IP address out here. So same IP is also, let's say, inherited by these machines out here as such. So whichever IP that you have here will have, I mean, the machines will have the same, let's say, IP out here as such. So
So
now if I take this,
this is for the load balancer, right? But generally, the public IP of the virtual machine will remain as is. I mean, it will not change. Right? If
as
I
is,
want to, if I want to
but
connect
again,
directly to virtual machine,
yes,
the IP will be different.
which
But for load
which I'll
balancer, it
come
is
down. That's
okay.
correct. Which I'll come down to. But again, what I'm now doing is that, see, I don't need a public IP address at all. When I created the machines, and I know that I'm attaching my machines to, let's say, a load balancer, I don't even want to attach a public IP out here because I can save some cost here. Imagine that you have a cluster of machines here. Let's say this is deployed, or this kind of a strategy is employed by someone called facebook.com. They just don't have two machines. They might have 200 machines that are running in the background. They might have so many machines because, see, this is being used, it's a global solution. This is being used by people across the globe. There is, let's say, in a second, there are about billions of requests that are actually coming in. So my so my load balancing should also be efficient. My machines also be have to, or my machines also need to, let's say, be more so that the amount of traffic can be accommodated. What if I put each and every public IP to these machines out here? Which means that for 200 machines, I need to create 200 different public IPs. Just for the sake of connection, I cannot do that. My organization will not even let me do that. They'll just tell me, okay, fine, you know what, you'll have to figure out a better solution for it. Just for you to connect it from a backend, I cannot let you, or I cannot let you put a public IP out here because you're putting a standard load balancer. So you'll have to put a standard public IP here. If you put a standard public IP, again, that's a static address. That's a different cost that you need to pay. I'm not looking at just one public IP. I'm looking at 200 public IPs out here, which is a very huge overhead cost that I need to pay out here. We'll also see how can we overcome this particular scenario. In this case, my virtual machines don't even have their own public IP addresses. So if I go into my resource group and if I group by type, I don't have a public IP today at all. I deleted those IP addresses out there. I do not need them. So I deleted those IP addresses out there. So they're not attached to anything. My virtual machines are only relying upon the public IP address of the load balancer. They don't have their own IP addresses out there as such. So we'll talk about this scenario as well. I mean, it's a valid question. We'll talk about that scenario as well. So let me go take this IP address firstly. Let me put it on the browser. Let me say enter. Now it's telling internet information services. I'm getting some kind of a page out here. If I forward slash put a default.html, it's telling, okay, fine, this is server demo VM1 from east to west. And if I now generate multiple requests, the amount of requests needs to be higher. So that's the reason it's just setting the same page. Let me take a different browser and let me try to hit the same thing. It's still getting this one because my client IP is being cached. If I use an incognito and try to give multiple requests to the same thing, I'm getting a demo VM00 from ECS2. So it means that it's able to balance the traffic provided it's not caching, let's say, my IP out here. It's able to balance the traffic between demo VM01 and between demo VM00 out here. Let's imagine this. Each and every virtual machine has something called what? Network security group rules. They have something called network security group rules out here. And when we were creating the machines, if you remember, we explicitly said that these machines need to allow HTTP traffic, which is nothing but communication over the internet. HTTP. Let's say that for the sake of argument, I go ahead into demo VM00, and this is the HTTP rule that I do have, which is nothing but, let's say, 320 or something like that. Let me go ahead and select this out. Okay, let me go ahead into the inbound rules. Let me select the HTTPS, and I'll delete this out. So I'm deleting my rules. So I'm telling, if I delete it, it's telling HTTP is not allowed. Let me do the same thing for the VM1 as well. I'll go into the inbound rules. I'll delete these rules out here. And once these rules are deleted, once they come into effect, it's telling fair to delete the rules. Let me go ahead once again and delete this one out. Okay, it should, yeah, delete it out, but for some reason it's telling it failed and all that stuff. But yes, the rules are not there. This is clean. Now let's come here and also check this out. So both the virtual machines, the NSG rules that are attached to both the virtual machines do not have the HTTP in place. There is no HTTP out here, or there is no HTTPS out here. My question is, will this still work? Because I'm trying to
I
now
think
interact over the internet. Mhm.
I think because allow all is there, any is there, right? Still,
Sorry, can you come again, please?
there is
Allow
one
all.
rule. There is one rule. Allow any
Hmm.
is there. There is one rule which allows all inbound,
Okay.
VNet inbound, or some rule. If you go to NSG,
Okay. So if I go here, so
so
very
the rule
firstly,
allow VNet inbound.
allow VNet inbound, which means that whatever is there within the same virtual network, I'll allow it. But here, I'm trying to establish a connection which is outside the virtual network.
Okay. What's
So
the
let's try this.
next rule? I mean, there is one more rule, right? Load balancer.
Yes. Well, let's check that out. Firstly, let's see whether this is working or not. And let's wait for a minute to see whether it's responding really or not out here. And also let's go to the incognito window and let's try this out. So still loading. Let me take this out. Let me again come back. It's able to load. It's coming. It's giving me the traffic for somewhere. And since this is loading, I can say that this is an IIS page that is coming, let's say, from my virtual machine out here. Let's wait for a second and let's allow this to load as well. Let's go into the incognito window. And yes, default.html. This is not, let's say, really coming up. Let's check this out. Yes, this default.html is also not coming up. Let's remove this out. Let's listen. This is coming up, but some reason that particular default.html is acting up a little weird and not loading up out here. So I'll need to just check this out. But yes, I'll have to see why this isn't loading, but it should ideally, let's say, load this out. The reason being, now, ideally, it will not even consider that there is a rule, there isn't a rule, or there is a rule out here as such. What it would do right now is that it would now take this particular rule out here into picture. Just called whatever is coming from the load balancer please allow it. Please go ahead and allow it to talk to my, let's say, virtual machine out here. Probably I'll have to tweak this rule a little bit so that the default.html page also gets loaded. For some reason, this page should load, but for some reason it isn't loading because the IIS page is able to load, which means that it's able to get this particular page from that particular machine. I'll have to check why basically this isn't loading, but let's see. This tells me that this rule is coming into action, which is telling that if you have a load balancer, in the front end, whatever request that this load balancer is, let's say, communicating with these machines, this is over a private IP address, not a public IP address. And the rule here is telling me that, okay, fine, you know what? Please allow the Azure load balancer to communicate. Allow, let's say, this particular load balancer in order to communicate with my machines. So I do not have to declare an explicit rule out here. If I have a load balancer, I can simply also remove my RDP also. I don't even need the RDP. I don't even need the RDP or something, because this rule will effectively come into picture. Wherein it is telling you, okay, fine, you know what? This is your load balancer, and load balancer is trying to communicate. And even if you go into your load balancer and go into the backend pool of the load balancer, it's talking directly to the NIC card of these particular machines over a private IP address. It's not even looking for a public IP address out here, which means that you do not even have to expose these machines directly on the internet. It doesn't really matter right now whether these machines are exposed out here, but I'll have to still check why the default.html page is not really coming up. Probably some header settings that I need to change out there. But these rules, right, are called system defined rules. I cannot delete them. I cannot select them. I cannot delete them. Whenever you create a network security group rule, all these are by default applied. Firstly, it tells, okay, fine, deny everything. Deny everything. Don't allow anything at a priority called 65,500. Saying, okay, fine, you know what? This is the priority rule that I'm giving. So by default, this particular energy will deny every traffic. It'll tell whoever you are, I don't care, I'll deny this particular traffic out here. But at 65001, out here, it's telling, please allow my Azure load balancer. One thing that you have to remember is that in a network security group rule, lesser the number, talking about this particular number of priority, greater is the weightage. So now your custom rules are telling, okay, fine, you know what? Yes, I'm going to deny everything, but at a lesser priority, it's telling minus, I will allow load balancer. Minus, there's one more rule out here. Azure or allow VNet inbound, meaning whatever is there inside the same virtual network, which means both the machines are there in the same virtual network. Both these machines are a part of the same VNet. For this machine to communicate with this machine, it doesn't require a public IP address. They can talk to each other over a private IP address communication out here. Because you have another rule here telling allow VNet inbound. So please make sure that whatever is there within the same VNet, please allow them to communicate with each other. This is how the rules in combination with each other kind of work. And on top of these ones, you can go ahead and add your own rules, telling that okay, fine, at a lesser priority called 100. So the priority number will always be a numeric between 100 and 4096 for user defined rules. So you can add user defined rules, you can delete user defined rules out here based upon the requirement that you have, but you cannot add or delete the system rules. These are by these are by default declared by Azure. Yes, any questions, guys?
What is the sequence of these rules, Kiran? Like process, sequence of process, greater to higher or higher to which one it will process first?
So it is always greater to lower, and
Mm-hmm.
lower the number, higher is the priority. So the process, the backend algorithm, Microsoft will go check what is the highest rule out here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just go back into those rules and into the inbound rule. So the highest rule out here is 65,500. So I'll say, okay, if 65,500 deny something, and from there it will subtract everything. It'll say, okay, fine, you know what, 65,001 lesser priority, so I'll allow load balancer. 6500, sorry, 6500 a VNet inbound, I'll allow the VNet. This is how it will subtract. So the process in the background, the service of Azure will process it from bottom to top, and the least priority rule will have the greatest weightage. Let's say you have a rule called 100 wherein you're telling allow RDP. That rule will take a precedence over everything else.
And Kiran, like inbound
Mhm.
security roles will also have for virtual networks, right? Similar to the load
I'm sorry, can you
balance.
come again? Sorry, can you come again, please?
Inbound rules and security roles will also be available in both virtual networks and load balancer in both area places, right?
No, these rules are available in the network security group rule section. So this is an NSG.
Hmm.
Where your NSG is attached, my NSG is attached at a network interface level. So all these rules will be applied to my virtual machine, not the load balancer. So it depends
Kiran,
on. Mhm. Good, please.
yeah, if you're having that inbound and outbound roles, and some
Mhm.
priority also is there, how it work in inbound role, outbound in that
Uh,
priority?
Anil, again, your voice is too distorted. Just give me a second. I'll
Yeah,
switch my. Just a second. Just a second. Now go ahead, please.
yeah, in inbound role is there, outbound role is there, and
Okay.
one more thing, some priority also is there. Yeah, how will
Yes.
work it work the priority in inbound role and outbound role? If you, I'm
See.
delaying that. Yeah, please.
Mm-hmm. Good, please. You finish your question.
Yeah, and if you are giving that some ports in some simple port, 80 port in denying outbound rule, and
Okay.
inbound release also all ports are denied is there, no? Yeah, how will it
Okay.
work? What is the priority?
No, it is just understand this. We are talking about two different things: inbound and outbound. Inbound is all the communications that is coming inside your virtual machine, meaning everyone who's trying to talk to your virtual machine out here. And in the inbound, if I am explicitly giving a rule telling that okay, fine, please allow 80,
Okay,
which means that I, as a user from the internet, can directly communicate with this particular virtual machine or this particular rule called 80, because this rule can have a lesser priority, say of 100. This is the first priority number that you can actually declare. So Azure will say, okay, fine, you know what? Apart from denying everything, which I'll do, anyways, I'll allow the load balancer, I'll allow everything that is there inside the VNet, plus I'll also allow HTTP for inbound traffic. But if you say that, okay, fine, you know what, in my outbound rule, I have a rule called deny HTTP, which means that the virtual machine, though people can talk to this particular VM, client can go in and let's say talk to this particular VM directly, but the VM cannot send anything outside. This VM cannot really send any, let's say, data packets outside or any data outside the network out here. So
Then by
inbound and
default,
outbound rules are complementary to each other. They work in a summation with each other out here as such.
outbound rules are allowed all, or so
Uh,
can we also?
it's the same thing. What happens in an inbound rule? You also have the same thing in the outbound. So if you see in the inbound,
You can,
I have
you can
65500,
explicitly deny.
65001.
Okay, you can explicitly
Explicitly
deny in
deny everything.
outbound. You can do
Sorry.
that in outbound. Can we explicitly deny in outbound security rules?
Okay, when you want to say explicitly deny, what exactly do you want to deny? You
You
want to
can
deny the.
write a rule. You can put a rule saying that
Yes, you can put a rule.
deny HTTP.
Yes, you can put a rule telling that the action here is deny. Let's see, the action here is deny out here. You can say deny. So the action here is allow or deny. You can say deny. Let's say you want to deny HTTP traffic. So I can say, you know what, the service is HTTP, and I want to deny this out. And this will explicitly
Okay, directly
put a
indicate.
rule out here. Just a second. This will explicitly put a rule out here telling whatever communication that the virtual machine wants to, let's say, talk to that particular world using the internet is explicitly denied out here as such. So this is a rule that you can explicitly put onto your outbound section.
And allow inbound load balancer rule. So
Mhm.
that is created only when we create a load balancer, right? Otherwise, the rule will not come in.
This rule will be created whenever, or let's say this is okay, allow internet outbound and something like that. Fine. This rule, which is the load balancer rule out here, will be created whenever you create an NSG, irrespective whether you have a load balancer or not.
Oh,
Irrespective of the fact that you have a load balancer or not, this rule will be placed by default when you create a network security group rule out here as such. But this rule will only come into an action when a load balancer is trying to talk to it.
correct. Okay, we cannot, which means, I mean, from load balancer, we cannot deny anything. It is always allowed.
Yes, it is always allowed.
And similarly for VNet also, right? It is always allowed.
Correct. Similarly, within the VNet, it's always allowed. Yes.
So if you want to, let's say, restrict the traffic, I mean, you need to create a lesser priority rule, right? Between the virtual
Yes.
machines. If you want to show
Between
that.
the virtual machines, you'll have to create a lesser priority rule and override it out.
Okay.
Kiran, one doubt.
Hmm?
So if we are
Good.
yesterday, I think in previous classes you explained about the IaaS, right? IaaS and
Mhm.
configuring the web services, HTTP and all. If we
Yes.
are using the load balancer, I
Mhm.
think significance of IaaS is not required, right? Anyway, we have option allow VNet inbound, so automatically
Yes.
through the load balancer. Then here
Yes.
IaaS is not required.
Here IIS rule, meaning here the rule called HTTP 80 is not required. You don't have to, let's say, put a rule called explicitly telling that please allow, let's say, the internet traffic out here as such.
So IaaS is not required. It means.
IIS will be required. See, there are two things that you're getting confused about. IIS is a software that you're configuring on your virtual machine so that that
Hmm.
can act like a web server. You have
Hmm.
to make sure that IIS is configured so that this machine can start acting like a web server out here and communicating with the internet. But you don't need a rule. Okay, what I mean to say is that you don't need a rule out here which tells explicitly this machine that okay, fine, please allow, let's say, inbound traffic over port 80. You don't need this rule because this load balancer is taking care of the same thing for you by using a rule called allow load balancer inbound out here as such.
Kiran, how to check whether IIS is working or not, whether it is running or not?
How to check IIS is running or not? You have to tell me that. I don't know. You will have to tell me how the IIS is working or not. How
Actually,
can you check
we
on?
have to install the web developer, right? Sorry.
That's fine. That is installation process. But how do we
Yeah.
check that?
Yeah.
If your machine is responding back, that itself means that the IIS is responding. This
Yeah.
itself
If
would
it is
mean that the
not
IIS. Hmm?
responding,
If it's not responding, then you'll have to log inside your machine. There are something called IIS logs that basically that gets created. You'll have to first check whether the IIS is properly installed or not. So if you go
We need
inside the
to check
machine,
if service is running or not, whether IIS
um,
service is running. If it is
ఎవరు
stopped,
అడిగినా నాకు అదే అవుతుంది. ఆయన మానంది రాదు, ఆయన మానంది రాదు.
Guys, please be on mute if you're not speaking anything. Thank you. Yes, if the
service you need
IIS
to check.
service, yes, for that you'll have to log inside your machine. So you'll have to take a look inside your machine, and there's something called IIS logs that get generated. Those logs will give you an insight on. I mean, I'll also show you once logging inside the machine, and also show you what kind of a logs that I'm really talking about. And those logs will also tell you why your IIS is not working, what do you need to do to, let's say, restart your service. In all likely, what we do is that we uninstall the service and reinstall it out. If the IIS is corrupt, we go and uninstall it, reinstall it out, or we update the, let's say, service out here. That should take care, or that should really tell you, or that should really fix the issue of all the IIS, or let's say really fix the issue of IIS not really not really running out here as such.
Yeah, sometimes I mean it's all troubleshooting steps, right? One is first
Correct.
step, you need to check the service whether it is running or not, or stopped, and why it is
Yes.
stopped. Yeah, and then you can check, go into IIS management console and look at whether you get a warning signal or red signal on the www root, and then troubleshoot it. Look into the logs,
Correct.
understand that. So everything is working. You can say on the local IIS server, open the browser and say localhost. It should open the
Yes,
page.
localhost, and that should give you an idea whether it is really working or not.
If it is from remotely, if it is not working, telnet on the port to the IIS server and see if it is getting response or not.
Yes,
So it's a sequence of troubleshooting steps.
it's a sequence of troubleshooting. Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Anymore? Go ahead, please.
Sir, in this scenario, load balance is attached to VM. HTTP and HTTP not allowed, sir. Not allowed. Load balance is also allowed. This
Load balancer
you
will
add
also allow this. Yes. Which
you
means that
added
yes.
load balance.
Mhm.
You added load balancer. You cannot
Okay.
add the HTML port and HTTP port.
Which you do not
Cannot
need
add.
it because yes, which you don't need it because there is always a rule here telling to allow the load balancer. It's telling okay, fine, you know
Okay,
what?
sir.
Please allow the load balancer. I'm going to do that.
Okay, sir. This rule is also applicable in outbound security rules.
In outbound security rules, it will be slightly different. So, for example, if you see, it's telling deny, let's say, outbound. Firstly, it's telling deny everything, but please allow all the internet. There, you do not have a load balancer because your system do not really have to, let's say, talk to the load balancer for a reason out there. It can directly talk to the internet, and then you have allow all VNet outbound. And what I did is that I denied the internet inbound by using a deny HTTP outbound out here, and I denied this particular traffic. So you can, by default, in the outbound rules, you have a different section of the rules that are configured out here, which is telling deny outbound delay or allow, let's say, which is saying, let's say, deny outbound, but please allow the internet and please allow, let's say, the virtual network. Now I put one more rule on top of it at a lesser priority, telling please deny the internet traffic out here. Please don't use the internet traffic at all. Is something that I'm now telling out here.
Sir, hello, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Sir, one more question. This topic, sir, another topic, previous topic. Sir, we created.
Can I hold with the previous topic? Can I please hold? I'll just complete one more concept and I
Small
can
doubts.
take that question. Yes, go ahead.
Small doubts. Uh, uh, we created VNet. You
Okay.
attached we attached storage account. How to access the storage blobs in the private IP address? How to access the private IP address?
How to access the storage blob inside the private IP address? I'll talk about that. We'll get into the virtual machine and I'll also show you how to access this storage account or the blobs of the storage account using a virtual machine out here. Using a VM, how can I access this out? I'll also show the same thing out there as such.
Okay, sir. Sir, sorry, sir. Okay.
All right. So now, just check this out. This is now a regional load balancer that I configured. It's a regional load balance that I have. Just a second, I'll just remove this out. Okay, fine. Which is only for a particular region called East US2. Let's say that you want a global load balancing mechanism, which means that in case this machine is not available, this machine is also not available, I want my traffic to go into a different region, say North Europe. This is something probably I would need. Meaning I want to let's say divert my traffic to a different region, for which you can be using something known as a global load balancing mechanism. Global load balancer is something that can be, let's say, used in such a kind of a scenario, which means that
And
I need a similar setup. I need a regional load balancer again. I need two different machines again, like North Europe 1 and North Europe 2, that are running out of a different region. And I need to do a similar configuration. I need to attach my machines. I need to configure my rules. I need to configure the HTTP, the backend ports, and all that stuff. And that is what I did. And that's the reason. If you just look at, let's say, my load balancers out here, forget about this one. This is for a different demo. I have two different load balancers here. One being demo LB US East 2 running out of ECS 2. The other being demo LB NEU running out of North Europe. And if you go inside this particular load balancer, if I just scroll down to, let's say, the backend pools, I have two different machines which are in a stop state. So I'll start them out, which is demo VM3 and demo VM4. It also has a load balancing rule. So I configured all these things. The load balancing rule is configured. The health probe is configured. Just like the way I did for East US2. Everything is now configured. So let me go ahead and start those machines as well. So I'll say demo VM3, demo VM4. I'll just hit the start button. I'll start this out. And let's wait for this. And it'll get started in the background. What I'll now do is I'll now say load balances again. And I'll create a new load balancer. And this time around, I'll create a global load balancing mechanism. So I'll say, okay, fine, I want to create a new load balancer. So I'll say demo load balancer. I will say global load balancing mechanism, something like this. And when you are going for a global load balancing mechanism, the load balancer SKU has to be standard. It has to be standard. You have to put it as standard out here. And I'll select a region and also tell you what is the region significance out here. Just scroll down and I'll say this is standard. This is public. And then I have something called what? Global. I'll say global. So it's telling it's a cross regional load balancer. It can only be deployed to a home region. Make sure you have a valid region out here. I'll just open this out. Let the documentation be there. It will come there. Again, the front end IP address. I'll say this is global IP. I'll create a new IP out here. I'll say this is global. I'll say add. I'll say add here. And in the backend pools right now, what I'll do is that since this is a global load balancer that is sitting here, I'll remove the user from here. I will now go ahead, add the or I'll now go ahead and add the regional load balancers to this. So I'm not adding my virtual machines directly. I'll add my regional load balancers into this particular load balancing mechanism. So I'll say, okay, fine, you know what? I'll say add. It's telling, okay, fine, you know what is the pool name? I'll say demo pool or global pool, something like this. And now it's telling, okay, fine, what is the load balancers that you want to, let's say, add to it? I'll say North Europe. This is the IP address of that particular load balancer. East US. This is the IP address of that particular East US, and I'll say add. And now I'll say inbound rules. I'll say add a load balancing rule. And very simple, I'll give the same rule out here. I'll say pool A, just scroll down. I'll say this is the global IP, backend pool is the global pool. I'll say port is 80, backend port is also 80. I'll say add this out. So I'm just going adding here, and please let's say observe here I have not configured a health probe. There's no health probe that I configured. The global load balancer relies upon the health probe of the regional load balancers out here. So it just goes ahead and says, okay, fine, I'll take the health probe from the regional load balancers, understand what are the machines, and it'll just divert. It'll just act as a forwarder. It'll just divert the traffic to either of East US 2 or North Europe. We'll also talk about which region will come here, either East US 2 or North Europe. And these load balancers will now take care of, let's say, the health probing. They'll say, okay, fine, let me look at the health of the machines. Let me divert to the machine which is, let's say, really healthy. And I'll just go ahead and review and create this out. So now creating a global load balancing mechanism, and I'll say, okay, fine, hit the create button out here. And very importantly, the pools of the global load balancer are nothing but the regional load balancers out here. I am not attaching the virtual machines directly to my global load balancer. I'm attaching the regional load balancers out here, and once this is created, which will take like a minute to go ahead and let's say create, we'll see how the load balancer really behaves. Now the point is that this load balancer, which is my first load balancer out here, is in East US 2. This is in North Europe. I'll say North Europe, EURP, North Europe out here. From a client's perspective, you're a client. Let's say I have multiple clients out here. I'm a client from India. You're a client from US. If you and I are hitting the same load balancer, the load balancer will now see, okay, fine. If I divert this request to US, how long will it take for the response to come in? Meaning the network latency. Which is okay, fine. How long will my request actually take to come back from US versus Europe? See, if I'm a user from India, I am closer to Europe than to US. So if I hit a server in the Europe, the performance is better and also the response rate is less. This is what the global load balancer will calculate. We'll say, okay, fine, you know what? Let's see what is the available server, meaning are the servers available? First question. Secondly, now which load balancer is closer to you? In terms of latency, which load balancer is really closer to you? And then accordingly, if I now go ahead and look at this particular load balancer right now, and if I take the front end IP address of this particular load balancer, paste it here, I'll get the IIS, yes, for sure. I'll say default.html. Coming from where? Demo VM 03. And if I go back into my virtual machine arrangement, demo VM 03 is a virtual machine that is running in what? North Europe. If this VM is not available, the traffic will go to the next available virtual machine in the same region, which is VM4. If this is also not available, that's where your failover will happen to a different region. So your global load balancer will always and always check what is the closest region that is available, what is the least region that is, let's say, giving you a least network latency out here, and depending upon that, your requests are load balanced accordingly. Your requests are going ahead and it will get load balanced accordingly out here as such. That's how we configure and deploy a global load balancing strategy out here as such. Is any questions, guys?
Yeah, the first question is the global load balancer. So we have given a region. So do we need
Yes,
to
correct.
give US East or can we give any other region?
Yes, on that, good point. This is what you need to give. The global load balancer has to belong to one of these regions.
Okay, it is
This is
available
called as
only.
a home region.
Any region we can pick, right? closest
Any
to us.
region out of this. Yes, all of these regions support zone redundancy.
Okay.
And also, very importantly,
Uh,
there are home. Just a second. Just a second. There is something called home region and also called participating region, which means that you can only attach load balancers in the backend pool that are running from one of these regions out here.
So these are
In
regional.
my case, yes, the regional load balancers. Yes, the regional load balancers belong or should belong to one of these regions. In my case, my regional one was, let's say, East US2, region 2 was North Europe. That's the reason I was able to, let's say, attach these two in the pool. If they don't belong to this particular region set, you won't be able to, let's say, use the global load balancing mechanism.
So the failover is seamless, right? I mean, it automatically happens.
Yes, failover is automatically taken care of. So we do not have to, let's say, really worry about that. The failover is taken care whenever one of the regions is not available. Let's say this is not available, then it will fail over to a different region out here as such.
So for higher availability, is it a good way of choosing the regional load balancers? Let's say my customer is across the globe, right? So I can choose
Hmm.
regional load balancers in a different regions altogether,
Yes,
and then the global load balancer in the home region, so that if one goes off, at least other
yes,
one
at
reroutes the
least
traffic.
yes. You will have one more solution that is there. So yes, if if your clients are across the globe, spread across the globe, best way to do is that probably, let's say you have East US here, you have North Europe here. I'll probably configure this to be Central US, because if I say that the East US is not available, even this load balancer will not be really available out here if the entire zone goes out. So that's the reason I'll configure them in 3 different regions to make sure that I have a good solution out here to divert my traffic.
There is no, again, from global to regional load balancer, is there any session persistence or something like that that we have
I'll have
seen
to check
from?
whether there is a session persistence or not. Since there is no health probe out here, let's see if I have a session persistence out here. Yes, there is a session persistence. You can either put a client IP and so on and so forth. But here it is none. But yes, you have a session persistence that you can configure even for your global versus the regional load balancer out here as such. Yes, any more
Generally, we
questions? I think.
configure a DNS, right? We don't use the IP addresses, and then we make sure that the DNS has the all the routing
Yes,
policy.
that's correct. We generally don't use the IP addresses directly, meaning it's difficult for me to directly give the IP address for a number of reasons. For which, what we can do is that, see, this is the IP address of the global load balancer, right? I can go ahead and in the configuration of this particular IP address, okay, in the configuration of this particular IP addresses, okay, let me go directly to the IP address out there. In the configuration of this particular IP address, I can add something called as a DNS name label. So instead of you taking the IP, I can give you a DNS name here using which you can interact with your machines out here as such.
In this example, we need 3 public IP address, right? So one for global,
Yes,
another
in
two
this
for region.
example, yes, correct. In this example, we would need 3 public IPs because one thing is a limitation of a cross-regional load balancer is that you cannot directly use a private IP communication with a global load balancing strategy. You cannot
Yeah.
do a direct, let's say,
The traffic
private
comes
IP
over
sync.
the,
Mhm.
and from, I mean, the routing need to be enabled in that case. I mean, because these two are, let's say, regional load balancers are on the
Mhm.
public IP. Your global
Mhm.
load balancer is also on the public IP. It's a different,
Correct.
completely different region
Mhm.
altogether. Right? So the
Correct.
routing, how do we ensure that
That's the
the routing?
reason. Yes, that's the reason we have a load balancing rule which takes care of your routing.
So the routes are created in the background. Is it?
Yes, the routes are taken care by the cloud provider. That's the reason you're just giving a rule telling that, okay, fine, if you hit an 80, then please
Yeah.
take me into a backend, and the route is something that I'm not really touching. on how we are going ahead and establishing the route is completely taken care by the cloud provider when you add the backend pool out here as such.
So that one, I mean, it will not go on the Azure backbone, right? It goes over the internet
Yes,
from
it goes over
global
the
to
internet.
region.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And from regional load balancer
Regional
to virtual
to
machine.
virtual machines, it will go over the Azure backbone, because that's the only route it has. It has a
So that
private
does
IP
the
communication.
does
Mhm.
that the natting process, I believe. I mean, public to private, and then so that is how
Mm,
it works.
yes, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Uh, yes. Any more questions, guys?
Kiran, under one global, under global region, global load balancer and cross region, both are same, right? So under
Yes,
one,
cross regional or global is the same. They're both the same. Like you can
both
call
the
it as
same.
global or
So,
cross.
so under one cross region balancer, how many, like, is is there a limit, like, home regions can we add, or is there any limit, or based upon the, by if you add more, it will decrease the performance, something like that?
No, there is no limit. The only limitation that you need to make sure is that the load balances, the regional load balances that you add, should belong to one of these regions. So how many
Ten
you can
number.
add? There is no limit out here.
So similar to the this regions, can we also have a multiple cross regions on top of these cross regions? Can we have one more cross region load balancer to
Mm,
manage?
I don't see a need for that. As in, like, even if you put one more load balancer here, I mean, you cannot do that. But if you put one more load balancer out here, you still have
No,
to gain.
parallel, parallel,
No,
not on
you
top of
can
this.
do. Yes, you can do parallelly, but again, it it doesn't really, let's say, add a lot of value to your solution. It doesn't really have a value addition to your solution out here as such. You can do a parallel, but again, you cannot attach a cross regional load balancer to another cross regional load balancer. That's something that you cannot do.
Correct.
But you can add, I think, nested, right? Let's say one top level load balancer, which is cross regional, to two or more cross regional, and from there to regional. If you have a bigger
From there to regional, no, we cannot do that, because this will only accept standard regional load balancers in the background. So you can only add regional load balancers in the backend as such.
okay. And one last question.
Okay. Just
The
Go ahead,
scaling
please.
part of the load balancer, it is automatically taken care by Azure, right? So let's say the
Yes,
traffic is too high
scaling.
because
Yes.
we are talking about public internet, right? So the traffic,
Mhm,
if it is
mhm.
a busy website or busy
Yes.
network,
Mhm.
so automatically it should scale up and down. Right?
Yes, and that's the reason, when you create a load balancer, right? You deploy the load balancer inside a network. So it will occupy the available subnets, and it will scale up or scale down depending upon the traffic.
So is it a horizontal or vertical scale?
When you say horizontal, vertical, okay, let's see.
Horizontal
It
in the
should
sense multiple load balancers will come.
load balances, yes. A
So
vertical
vertical means,
instance,
I mean,
the
the
instances are increased in the
capacity of
background.
load balancer. Yeah.
It's a vertical scaling that it will employ.
Then it will not occupy the subnets, right? It is one subnet, but the capacity or
But
capability of the load
that's right.
balancer will keep on.
That's right. That's right. But yes, the capability. Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, yeah, that's right. It's a vertical, so it won't really occupy the amount of subnets. That's not entirely true. I'll just have to look whether it also does a horizontal. But as in, let's say, what I have a best understanding is that it's a vertical load balancing and not a horizontal, because horizontal is employed in something like an application gateway, but load balancers, which are regional or global load balancers, they do take a horizontal route. So yes, you're right. It won't take,
Vertical.
or it won't occupy the subnets out here as such.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
that is
just a
how in
second.
AWS also goes.
Yes, and just a second. I'll just take a quick question offline. Yes, good, please. If you add more load balances, will the charge go up? Of course, yes. Because when you are going ahead and adding more load balances out here, you're creating multiple load balances, And one thing that you have to observe is that you're just not creating a load balancer. You're also attaching backend pools of machines. So yes, your cost spirals up, your cost spikes up out here
No,
as
I think
such.
public IPs will cost.
Public IPs will also cost, but there will also be a backend cost of running the virtual machines,
Yeah,
which
that
means
is.
that if you add one more load balancer, I don't see why a client will add just an empty load balancer out here. They won't do that, right? So they will also add the machines out here. It means if you're
So is it?
adding another load balancer, it's not only the public IP that is attached to this particular load balancer that's chargeable, but it's also the cost of running the machines. Even this is, let's say, at a cost. Public IP address is not free. This is also chargeable. This is also chargeable because you're doing a static public IP here, because it's a standard load balancer that you're taking. So it's a static public IP that you're doing here out here. One more point: if you have a basic load balancer, you cannot attach it to a global load balancer. That's a limitation of a basic. So yes, it's a public IP which is charged, and also the charge that you, let's say, incur for running your machines in the background. Even this is getting charged out here as such.
Just one hypothetical question there.
Hmm.
Let's say I don't have a traffic at all.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
configured this setup like global and the regional load balancers,
Hmm.
and my
Hmm.
virtual machines are also idle. Let's say 1 a.m. in the night, right? There is no
Okay.
traffic. So
Okay.
still, will there be any charge on the load
Yes, there
balancer
will
side?
be
I understand the VMs,
uh,
but on
on
the
the
load
load.
balancer, yeah.
Mhm. Yes, on the load balancers, yes. You still need to pay for the public IP address because this is a static IP address. You have allocated an IP to yourself. So it will still
Yeah.
be a charge out here. There will still
So
be
for
a
the load
charge.
balancer itself, there is no charge. I mean, public IP address
The load,
or the
yes.
backend VMs.
Yes, the load balancer itself, there is no charge as such. Meaning you're not really paying a charge for the load balancer itself, but you're paying a charge to the public IP address attached to the load balancer. When you add the basic load balancer, will it be charged or not? No. Because basic load balancer, again, when you use the IP address of the basic load balancer, that's when you'll incur a charge. Meaning you're adding an IP address to the load balancer out here. That IP address, though being dynamic, for the time that you are using it, you'll still be charged for the IP address that is attached to the balancer. Load balancer cannot support, sorry. If it's a standard load balancer, it won't support a basic IP address. If it's a basic load balancer, it will support a basic IP address. So basic to basic, a standard to standard.
One other question, Karan.
Yes.
So there is a
I'm a
something
little
called
over the
a
time right now. So it's almost 7 minutes past 9. So I'm a little over the time right now. Can I just pause the question here and take it
yeah, yeah, sure.
in the tomorrow
Yeah,
session?
we'll take tomorrow. Yeah, sure.
Yes. All right. So I'll just pause the session here because I just have someone else waiting out here to, kind of, let's say, give a session of that. So I'll just pause the session here and we'll continue this tomorrow and we'll continue discussion tomorrow and we'll take questions and then we'll get started. Thank you.